welcome back to Fans of Fandom. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Wesselmann, psychologist, professor, and full-time nerd. On this show, I have deep dive conversations with cool people about things we're fans of. If you're joining us, chances are you're a fan too. Welcome aboard. So for this series, The Dark Ages of DC, please welcome back my co-host, Mr. Victor Dandridge.
Hello.
Victor, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yes, I am self-publishing comic creator Victor Dandridge, lovingly called the hardest working man in comics. I'm a phenomenological narratologist who teaches the philosophy of storytelling through my You Create Comics line. And if I'm not doing that, I'm writing amazing new stories through my Vantage In-House Productions creator-owned imprint. It's a pleasure to be here. I mean, obviously, Death of Superman, if you guys have followed the series so far, you know, we have a lot of thoughts on that. And it's a huge piece of my comic book history. So I'm super glad to be back talking with you, Eric. Can't wait.
Excellent. Another ad that I found in a Wizard magazine, I think it was the same issue, getting back into sort of these different ways that they were providing for retailers. Right here we have this ad that says Superman is dead. So once again, leading with, hey, comics world, in case you didn't know, now you know. And they go through here, this was for Supercard. And kind of like direct, was it Dynamic Forces that we've talked about before? They were doing their special signature editions that they could buy their own copies of this, get these things signed by the artist, and then sell it heavily marked up. Here's another one where you could get the collection of all of your individual issues, plus 75, the newsstand and collectors. And one of the things I want to point out here is what I have in the call out box. The artist will autograph the outside of the special packaging instead of the comics itself to protect the integrity and collectability of the factory sealed product. So they're talking about that black bag that we talked about last time.
Yeah.
Do we not? You got to sign this shit on the cover, right? So the bag is signed and not the book.
Because you're not supposed to open the bag. You're not supposed to open it. You're supposed to keep that in there. But the bag is signed because anything being signed is valuable. That's what we've determined with the collector speculator market. Anything that's signed is valuable. And if I have this bag, this polygraph piece that's signed, that too is valuable, despite the fact that the insides have never seen the light of day. Like, you got to protect that. And I think that might have been a hidden piece that we missed out on. We should have came up with Polybags for Polybags. So that way you can slide your signed polybag into a clear polybag, seal that, and everyone gets to see it forever. Like, yo, I got my polybag signed and it's tucked away, polybagged and boarded. Like, let's go.
That'll be a separate comic graded thing, right?
Exactly.
The comic graded, the bag has to be opened.
Yeah.
What's going to happen if you want it graded? But now my bag included in this set is
right. They should hire us for this marketing stuff. Like, we got it.
Okay, so since that's a good segue, let's talk about this Polybag debate, right?
Yes.
Superman 75 was not the first comic to have a polybag. They've been doing it for at least a year or so before that. I think Spider-Man, the McFarlane, that big issue may have had one, and I know X-Force
definitely had one.
Yeah, right, because that had all the cards, and to the point where all of the Wizard and the other trade presses that were starting to come out were bagging, and there was this issue of, well, do I open it? Do I buy 2 copies? Well, let's kind of look at some of the things that folks had said. So here we have September '92, Wizard 13. So a few months before Superman 75. This particular column, Collecting Comics of the 90s, had an entry where they talked about this. So, but still, what do collectors do about the bagged or unbagged values? In 20 years, these cheap bags will turn the comics yellow, while the unbagged copy will still look new. Does the term mint still apply here? So this is them sort of struggling with this issue of, well, do we keep it and do we not? And speculating what the hell would happen.
What will happen if we do or if we don't?
Yeah, and this was not the only time that was talked about. Here in Wizard 20, It should be noted that experts agree that keeping your comics in factory-issued polybags will eventually ruin them, as they aren't as good for the comics as Mylar bags you buy yourself.
What I love about this is it goes right back into that phrasing of, I'm almost out, I don't have many left. To say something is not as good as something else does not mean that it's inherently bad. Does not mean that at all. It just means that perhaps Mylar bags will be better, but then you have to ask the question of, for what, right? Because when you say polybags will eventually ruin them, is that because you can't check the mint value of the book itself, and therefore it becomes negligible? Like maybe the inside of the bag it's terrible, it's bent up, it's folded, but the bag looks pristine enough that you can't tell that. You can't tell that maybe the bag has been dropped and a page is dented or misprint, like any of that stuff that can affect the value of a comic. You can't tell from a factory polybag book, but you can from a Mylar, because you can actually open it. You can actually see inside of it. There's all these different things that make it so different. But again, in terms of storytelling, is the concept that the polybags are made of material that's going to break down, that it's borderline comic book asbestos? Like, what are we saying here? And
yeah, and I love that point, because with this is again in the speculative market, right? And up to this time in the 90s, maybe late 80s, this concept of archiving and reselling comic books for higher values, relatively new.
right.
That for decades of comic books existence, this stuff was rolled up in people's back pockets, stored horribly. So within, we'll say, 5 to 7 years, this idea was a relatively new concept. And as my spouse is trained in archaeology and has worked in museums, and so she will tell me that yes, there is some truth to this statement that it will ruin the books, but the question, of course, is how long. So she's thinking like, acid free, I want to archive this for decades, of display for cultural perpetuity, right? That over a long enough time span, just as everybody's life expectancy drops to zero, right? Unless you are using museum grade, this will survive nuclear fallout. Eventually it will, but when is that?
What is that eventuality? Are we talking, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years? That's a very long time to consider something like that. And I think the other part that makes it so very interesting to me is the amazing, and I mean, there are folks that, if we had the judicial jumps that we have today, something like this could be liable. This could be a defamation statement that that the publishers are purposefully putting something out that is going to drop in value for what they did to it and not what you did to it. So you could argue that through this, a class action lawsuit could be band together, and now publishers that want a polybag are forced to do it in museum grade archival material that has to protect the material inside for X amount of decades minimum, or else. Like, that's the way this could have come about if this was truly a valued market on the outside world, right? Because what they're talking about is the literal idea of producing a product inferiorly that is meant to break down and not last. If that is the case for a product that is supposed to be valued like comics were at this time, they would be in trouble. They would be in trouble. That's like suggesting that, we know cars are going to break down at some point. But if manufacturers were purposefully making them with material so that they did break down, that would be a problem. We're seeing that conversation happen with our cell phones. There's the aspect that what is it, when a new iPhone comes out, that Apple stops upkeeping the system productions for older models to force you to have to buy a new phone. Like, and there are people that are like, that's not fair. You can't do that. We bought this with the intent that so long as we maintain its quality and it should be working just fine, and you've made it so that it purposefully degrades so that we have to buy a more expensive, newer version. That's not right. that is what this would have been back then.
Yeah.
So,
and I anticipate that, just as I'm sure it's in the user agreements and the size 4 font, that it probably says, oh no, we're only agreeing to this and what we want to do. So what they might say here is, well, we bagged it to hold the extras.
right.
In most cases, that's the way it was. I'm not going to say there wasn't comics that were bagged by themselves.
Right.
Because I mean, that was a debate, and I may have it here somewhere. I know I have it in my archives. I may have it on upcoming slides, but I know that there were a lot of fans who were pissed off at Wizard. Like, why are you bagging everything so we have to buy 2? And the Wizard folks are like, no, we're bagging it so we can hold the cards. So people can't steal the cards. So retailers can't take the cards out and sell those to you separately.
Right.
So that's the only reason why we have the bag. We didn't say the bag so it goes up better. And that would probably be in this litigious society how they would reconcile.
Especially when you start to get into the semantics of a clear polybag versus a graphic polybag. So Death of Superman issue 75 was a total graphic polybag. You couldn't see the books on the interior. At least with Wizard, there was a vast majority of it that was printed clear, so that you could actually see the material inside. Maybe they would have some graphics on it to kind of let you know what extra materials were there, but they paid good money for the cover, for cover art to be showcased. They're not just going to cover that up. That is the cover. Like, I'm not going to cover it. So you could argue that the idea between a clear bag versus a color printed bag, and the dexterity or severity of quality within that is different. So like there's a million different ways to have approached that, from a 2023 perspective that I don't think would have existed in a 1993 perspective, which was, oh, I guess I just got to buy 2 of them then. All right, that's fine. Like, we would have been like, no, why do I have to buy 2? If this is going to break down, then it's your fault and I shouldn't have to pay for that. And that's a very, very interesting sort of move. I wonder, and I've wondered forever, if this wasn't something that was instituted by very forward-thinking collectors. Say something like this. And again, the idea of libel in this space, I'm not saying that it didn't exist, but in this space, we weren't thinking in that way as comic creators or collectors or anything like that. So you say something like this as a potential rumor with the intent that it will inspire people to open their bags. So now the ones that you have that are not opened are now more valuable because they're sealed. Is that a possibility? Is this the most Lex Luthor nefarious idea to suggest that keeping it in the bag might destroy it, and therefore a bunch of people open theirs and you're sitting back there like, ha, 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 the long game has been played and I will never open mine?
I think we just created our own conspiracy theory, right? This is Polybag Gate. It's Polybag Gate.
Come on, let's go. Let's go.
Now, let me say to all those people out there that we do not endorse, condone, condemn, don't hold us legally responsible for whatever you do.
It's totally up to you. It's totally up to you. We're theoretically hypothesizing, okay, that if there was someone who had an understanding of the speculators market, because clearly they would have failed with the upcoming crash, but had the crash not happened, would they have been onto something of true maniacal Bernie Madoff proportions of getting people to open their poly bags by suggesting that keeping them in the bags would ruin it, while they hoarded as much as they could of polybag material? Just throwing it out there, because that would have been the most genius play of all time. Of all time.
Oh, on the next episode. Well, so I got another one here from Wizard, June 93. So at this point in time, we'd be midway, or we'd be in the beginnings of the reign, which we haven't gotten to yet in our podcast.
Right.
Here, this is what Wizard folks are recommending. Open it and store it in acid-free bags and boards, the safest way to go. So again, here, polybag comics will deteriorate in one way or another. So whether that was a ploy or whether that was an honest thing that they don't know, we'll be agnostic about. Here's another one I found from February 93, so jumping back in time a little bit. This is a letter from the fan. Lots of collectors, myself included, have been discussing this issue for quite some time. In Wizard 14, you have stated that polybags should not be collected, that they damage the comic in the long run, and I agree. Yet as you say this in your very own mag, you list comic books that are polybagged as worth more than the ones that are not. So sort of putting out this sort of inconsistency here. And Wizard's response here is, quote unquote, regardless of our personal beliefs in the controversial polybag issue, our price guide has to reflect what's going on in the marketplace, not what we feel is right or wrong. Whether we like it or not, sealed polybag issues are, on average, worth more in the market than their open counterparts. So whether or not they were thinking about this in the context of a court of law, they at least have it here to be like, don't blame Wizard.
I love it. I love it. And again, this is such a brilliant sort of showcase of how this comic book event bled from pop culture and got into major conversations. Because again, the idea of that response, right, from Wizard is such a legal eagle response. They had to run that through somebody to say, okay, we're being accused of potentially giving off contradictory information, and we could be held liable for what we've said. What do we do? And so the idea of, actually, on a personal level, we feel this, but the market outside of us, because, and I think what makes that really interesting is one could argue at the time, Wizard was hands-on with affecting the market value of a lot of things in comics. The way they promoted it, the way they talked about it, in addition to the price guides that they featured, all hyped up certain, creators, products, characters, all that stuff. So they're essentially saying, well, we're talking about it on a personal level as Wizard. That's our personal thought. But the market, though we're technically having a hand in how that market flows, the market is saying this, but we don't know if that's for the long term or not. We're just saying that in our estimation, long term, we would say that this isn't a good thing. But right now, if you're one of those guys that's get in, get out, yeah, it's worth more right now because that's what the market says. It's not us, it's the market. We're just reporting, and I think that's one of the most interesting pieces of this whole marketing strategy. You've got somebody that is clearly a player within the speculation market by the way that they report on content, but at the same time are using this outside semi third party value structure to be like, but we're not saying, we're just adding to the value of this thing whenever we feature a character on the cover, or we're featuring the creators, or talking about what happened behind the scenes to make this story happen. Oops. But it's such a slippery slope. But again, we're in a space and place in the early 90s where the legalities of this stuff we weren't as contentious about. It wouldn't be for another couple of years that we really start to see more legal precedent start hitting, and people getting sued for rights to things and stuff like that in a very open court sort of forum. We never saw it like this before.
Yeah, that's a great point. They also had ads right inside Wizard, for and you want to talk about savvy marketing to present an argument that would benefit you. Certainly the people who sell the Mylar bags and boards.
Genius.
I just love, warning, your comic books are slowly dying. And of course, there's all the crap underneath it in the smaller font, but this catches your eye. And I do love this, talking about conspiracy theories. This thing I pulled out here from the smaller text. They lied to you about polybags and cardboard boxes. Don't let these man-made disasters near your comics. Avoid polybags. It's just awesome.
That's amazing. That will contaminate, not could,
right?
Will contaminate your comic books. It's gonna happen.
I mean, here's an interesting thing too. I mean, like, we talk about conspiracy theory rhetoric. They lied to you. I mean, this is a full-on. I mean, if we look at like scare tactics in terms of just the psychology of rhetoric, right? I mean, they're hitting you in your feels.
Oh, hardcore. I think that's one of the most brilliant pieces because again, this would be a liable statement. Okay, they
Yeah.
lied to you. Who are you saying lied? Because the only people that you could point to would be the publishers. You could say the retailers lied to you. Like these would be some very contentious words in today's market, where if anybody trying to sell something else said this to you, oh, liable suits for days, just sending out cease and desist left and right. Don't you ever say this again, trying to sell your product, talking about I lied to you. Again, smart move on whoever did this because they took full advantage of, well, we have this thing that's actually so much better for your product. If you just want to, come open your bag and buy these, put your stuff in here. This is meant to protect it. That wasn't. And we can say it's such a brilliant opportunity. It's absolutely brilliant. And again, you said this was featured in Wizard.
I believe so. Yes,
That's amazing.
if not Wizard, at least one of my other trade press magazines.
Amazing. Because again, you get those hardcore collectors. I always knew it. I knew it was going to ruin that stuff. Like they're buying Mylar by the dozen. Like, yeah, you figure what? These are coming in packs of 50 to 100 Mylar bags at $5 a pop, like, per pack. Yeah, all I got to do is sell what, a couple thousand of them, and I'm retiring. I don't have to do this anymore. Like I'm good. I'm absolutely good.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, here's another one that bringing it specifically back to 75 and is from April 93. So, dear Wizard, I've heard some rumors about Superman 75 first edition. They said that the bag it's contained in is made from cheap chemicals, so that the sooner or later the comic in there will turn into powder. Is this true? The response: I don't know about turning your books into powder, but Polybag books will eventually do one of three things. One, the bag will rot and come apart. Two, it will begin to damage the comic within the bag. Three, unless current trends and thinking patterns change, the fans who buy the comics will grow sick of purchasing multiple copies of these unopenable, soon to deteriorate, not that hot anymore issues, and the issue will soon lose consumers. So there's a lot we can test here, and there's a lot that, of course, one could argue over a long enough time would happen. Because earlier you mentioned the comic book bust, and there are people who argue that Superman 75 contributed to that, which would unpack maybe if we had a whole other 2 or 3 hours. But let's talk a little bit about some of these other claims.
So number one, the bag will rot and come apart. I've never seen a polybag rot. That's me. Now maybe that's a matter of time, conditions, where you've held it. Like there's a lot of things that have to go into the concept of the polybag on itself just rotting. It's not biodegradable. It doesn't just do itself. So there's got to be a number of factors that go into that would instigate that kind of behavior for standalone materials, right? Because otherwise, if that was the case, think of how many things would be made out of polybag material today, right? Like we would have stopped making styrofoam and just put in polybags. Food would be served in polybag like plates because at some point it will just go away. And that's not the case. Like we know that's not the case. So again, the time frame and the actual instances of that happening, undefined. It will begin to damage the comic within the bag, undefined, because again, what are the circumstances and environmental situations where that would happen? Is it a matter of the location that you've put your bag is too hot, it's too cold, it's too wet? Like all of these things would have to happen, which, truth be told, could potentially damage anything, no matter whether it's archival, Mylar, like whatever the material could be made out of. If the environmental situations aren't right, it could very well destroy whatever you're talking about, like no matter what. So that's not, that's neither here nor there. That's really just like,
So assuming that they're not thinking long haul half a century, right? They're thinking, not when I'm dead and, as a legacy, my kids are going to sell this. They're thinking while I have it, right? So within a couple decades, and this, of course, we mentioned is the beginning of the speculator market or the early part of it. You've just had, comes out in April 93, which means it was probably submitted, we'll say January, maybe February of 93, right? So a couple months after the media hullabaloo, the run on all the 75 bagged editions, people buying a bunch. Couple months right afterwards, there are those stories of people spending $300 in some places to get a copy of the bagged. So that's probably the mindset that they're in. And maybe this person did spend a lot of money and wants to make sure that doesn't go away, right? I showed you, for example, in the last episode, my bag that's now 30 some odd years old, and I opened it, and so the bag is still there, right? We can't speak to the particular comic material in there since I did open it back at 30 years ago. If only we had an unopened copy of 75. If only. I really wish we did. Oh, wait.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. 30 years later and unopened.
Unopened.
Is it rotted? Has the material rotted? Are there holes? What do you see? Give us a breakdown, play by play, if you will, of the quality of the polybag itself. Does it have strange wrinkles? Is it discolored in any way? Tell us.
So there are some strange wrinkles up here, maybe just a little bit in the bag, right? But there are and a little bit of rubbing here at the bottom.
Okay.
So, but as you can see, no holes, no major tears or any of that. So we know that it hasn't rotted. Now, we can't speak to. I don't have X-ray vision.
Okay.
I can't see what's inside the bag.
Very Superman of
you. If only there were a way to open this.
Oh snap! Here we go, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna open it.
He's opening it live as we record this.
Live unboxing.
Unbagging, people. Unpolybagging. Okay, that's it. That's it. It is now open.
Slight top.
Okay, here we go.
Now see that it has been opened.
Yes.
There's no dust coming out.
What? It didn't eat the book?
It didn't turn into powder.
They said.
Myth busted there.
30 years later.
30 years later, yeah. So let's see here. Pulling out first.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's snagging that. I'm just gonna go ahead. I ripped off the Band-Aid. I'll cut that other little corner off there. Okay, all right. We have the poster.
There it is. Is the poster damaged?
Well,
is there any sort of fading or maybe a staining from the polybag on the whites of the poster that you can see?
Not according to what I'm showing you here.
Yeah, no blanching of any sort. Not an acidic burn.
No, it looks pretty solid.
Okay.
No crazy creases.
The fold is still there. Look at that. Look at that.
Trying to show it to the camera here. Looks like everything
is good. I see that Tim Drake Robin back there, that Wally West Flash. Just throwing it out there.
There you go. So me now put the poster down. Let's see what else we got. We got the obituary.
Okay, classic.
So just a little bit of a crease right there, if you can see it.
Okay.
So which corresponds to where that crease was in the bag.
Got you.
No discoloration.
No. I don't even know if that printing is faded. That doesn't look like printing itself.
No, that is crisp and clear as if it were printed yesterday.
What kind of paper is that? Is that more of a glossy text paper? Is it more matte finished?
I don't know what that means.
So matte finish would be kind of dull, not shiny. The posters are shiny.
At least the black is shiny.
Okay, so the black is shiny.
The black is shiny.
Okay, that's probably a gloss paper. So even with it being smushed together, print side on print side, right?
Mhm.
And the potential pressure of other books pressed against it did nothing to fade the printing of that particular piece.
Right.
Okay, all right. There's a lot of debunking here happening
Yes.
in this live space.
We are the Mythbusters here.
Yeah.
With a small M, right? No
Small M,
trademark.
small M. We don't want no problems. We don't want no problems.
So here are the stamps.
They still look good.
Still look good.
Look vibrant. Like, I don't see a color fade. I don't see any of that. Okay.
Okay. What else we got in here? We got the card.
Okay. Again, still vibrant, still strong, very
Mhm.
crisp.
Yep.
I'm not seeing any problems here.
I should probably be holding up the bag with the camera so you know that I'm not,
Yeah. This isn't
pulling
stuff
something elsewhere. Here is the book itself.
Oh, it looks good. Still shiny.
Still shiny, no discoloration,
No,
just a
no.
reflection from my lamp.
Again, no blanching, no acid burns,
Nope. Back.
none of that. Okay. That's crisp.
The oh no, this is interesting. I don't remember for myself, but the armband is inside the book.
Oh,
I don't remember if that's the way it was in my original one or if that it just
it
happened to
makes
be
sense. It makes sense. It's a good way to protect it. So that makes sense.
just the one armband so far.
Mhm.
You can see here from the ad and the pages.
Look at that.
No
Nintendo
yellowing.
stuff. Wow. That's amazing. That's an authentic printing right there.
Say what?
That's an authentic printing to have the Super Nintendo
Yes,
game. I
exactly.
love it.
So here's
Here we
the
go.
armband.
That still looks shiny foil with the S. Yes, it doesn't look like that's faded at all. No.
Nope.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Pulling things way too quickly here. And then oh no, so that's bizarre.
Or what else were you looking for?
I had two armbands in my last one, didn't I?
I think that was an anomaly. I think you caught like a unicorn because when I got it, I only had one.
Okay.
So yeah, I believe getting two armbands, you caught a unicorn.
Okay, because I flipped through here, yeah. And nope, it's not, it's hiding in this book.
Yeah, no. It should just be one armband to wear. That's it.
So if I would have known and could prove there was two armbands and kept it sealed,
that would have been
like, here, this
super
one's
valuable. That would have been such a high value book because nobody else got two armbands. Or if they did, it was in such a small quantity and they would have had to open it to know that they got two. So
right.
Immediate dismissal. But what's interesting is, again, in our disproving, what we're saying is not that the Polybag would not eventually do it, but it would definitely take longer than 30 years, which is a vast amount of time when it comes to collectability. And the reason why I say this is because at the beginnings of what we're calling the speculators market, and really the early 90s, when it hit like such a figurehead point, is yes, you had golden age DC books that had a particular value to them, but some of the first really applicable books of that speculator market were the early Marvel books. And Marvel was just hitting their 30-year sort of celebration point starting in the 1960s. So they had just hit 30 years. So that right there kind of showcases that, and I want to be specific, they were celebrating 30 years as Marvel. Yes, Captain America existed before that, but Marvel as an imprint, name, as the brand, started in the 1960s. So Marvel would have been hitting 30 years at the same time that this speculators market was really getting started. So in conjunction to this opening this right here would have been the equivalent of having a Polybag Fantastic Four #1. And as you can see, the Polybag did not destroy the book. It didn't do anything to it. So in the same amount of time that it went from, Fantastic Four, actually, if we're going to be very specific, the same amount of time that it went for X-Men #1 to this point in 1993, the material would have been fine.
Right. And at least, and let's be clear, I suppose, if we're, trying not to avoid getting sued ourselves.
Exactly.
That if it did any damage whatsoever in those 30 years, it is not noticeable to our eyes, right?
Yes,
I suppose if we were comic book graders,
maybe.
maybe we would be able, or if we had microscopes, who knows?
Right.
But based upon the evidence, or based upon these claims that were in these trade press, these sort of urban legends that were going around, we can definitively say the bag did not rot.
Yes.
We can definitively say that it did not turn the materials to powder. And
Yep.
if it yellowed the pages at all, it's not perceptible to me.
There you go. In Pawn Star parlance, you would have to call in an expert to debunk what we visually can see right here. That's what that is right there. So again, when you watch Pawn Stars, those guys have a ton of knowledge, and they can generally make agreements beforehand. You know, if you bring in something, if they know enough about it, they can make an agreement. It's only when something is so deep in, you know, out of their context or beyond their scope of expertise that they bring in somebody else that has even more expertise to get like a real lockdown, you know, proof of concept, authenticity, if you will, or something like that. So in Pawn Star parlance, this is us going to the counter and we're both flipping through it and they go, yeah, it looks pretty good. That's what that is right there. Yep. You know, now if they bring in somebody with a microscope and testing and, you know, and they're like, there's like a 3% degrade, wouldn't see it.
Nope.
We would not see it. So yeah, what an amazing experimentation. This is so crazy to see like claims from 30 years ago and being able to test those claims now is absolutely amazing. And part of the reason why you were able to do this is because the number 3, which is separated by a nice chunk of space here, actually occurred. Yes. And I think that becomes the most borderline Simpsons creepy prophetic statement in a Wizard magazine ever. Because if you think like, because again, as they're talking about it, right, in this context, some of these bags went as far as $300, right, to get that single bag. Was it anything of the sort for you to purchase that one?
No, it was I think I got this one for like $18. And I so not anywhere that close, right? Let's talk a little bit more about this discussion.
Yes.
Right? So in the pricing, what do the actual data eventually tell us? Right. We have, for example, here, a Wizard had a section called Market Watch. And so here is number 16, issue 16, December 92. So around the release of The Death of Superman, this would have been that corresponding issue. And so let's just see what some of they were writing about at that time. So I'm going to quote here again for those who are just listening. The death of Superman has certainly brought DC Comics a great deal of publicity. Every aspect of the media has brought the Man of Steel's demise into the spotlight, and public reaction to this is similar to the media circus surrounding the death of Robin several years back. Right, so we've been spending a lot of episodes now, a lot of airtime talking about the quote unquote media circus, the campaigns, and the closest equivalent they had would have been the call in to vote for Robin to live or die.
Absolutely.
And that, of course, is Jason Todd Robin.
Right.
Here's another section from that article. It would be safe to assume that the aftermarket value of this will increase quickly and dramatically, but one has to wonder how long that value will be maintained. Take into account the similar media issues around the aforementioned Batman 428, so death of Robin, as well as the Superman number 50 engagement of Lois and Clark issue, Batman 457, the new Robin costume, and Action 662, Superman's ID revealed to Lois. So yes, they got engaged, but she got engaged to Clark, and didn't know that he was Superman yet. And so then the later milestone issue was, hey, this is the reveal. Right?
By the way.
Due to outside influences, this is their sort of take home. The prices will increase due to outside influences, but soon after the media blitz has faded, so did the value. Referring to those earlier issues. Proceed with caution. So that's their take home. You know, it's $295 cover price. We're going to see this immediate spike, like a couple examples of $300 in New York, but it's going to go away. So that's what they're arguing here in December 92. In January 93, the next issue, we again say the biggest news this month is the climax to the Death of Superman storyline 75, topping the charts at Diamond's Top 100. So number one, every issue they had Diamond's Top 100, and Superman issues were always on the top 100, but they were usually lower 50, right? This is a serious victory for DC Comics, and they've been steadily slipping in the charts in popularity for the past several months. And as we've talked about in previous issues, this is the Dark Ages, right? This is the time of the anti-heroes. So Lobo, Guy Gardner, those were selling pretty well, you know, and Superman was still selling well enough to have 4 books, right? Let's be clear about that, but not constantly topping the charts, right? Like Spawn, you know, the Image, where we're usually in
they
that.
Came in and kicked the doors down, like.
So according to Diamond Distributor Order Ratio, where they average out how many copies of a title were ordered compared to the best-selling titles, this is what the average store ordered. For every 100 copies of Amazing Spider-Man 372, 540 copies of Superman 75 were ordered.
Wow. That's a lot of books, y'all. Now, what's crazy is where the market is right now. We have seen a steady decline across the board in terms of comic books ordered and sold. Here, we're talking books in the millions. We are lucky if we have books that break 100,000 units now. So it's very heartwarming on one level to be like, man, remember the good old days? But at the same time, you go, we've got to do a better job of reinvigorating readership again, so that we can get back to those kinds of numbers on a regular, consistent basis. Because again, can you think of what happened in Amazing Spider-Man 372? Is that a seminal issue? Not that I can think of either. So to compare essentially a regular Spider-Man book with the Death of Superman kind of shows how regular books were selling so well that you could highlight a seminal issue amongst them to kind of compare how much more valuable it was to the seller's market or to the buyer's market. We couldn't do that today because books are selling, generally speaking, so much lower that it would be a very strange sort of phenomenon to suggest any sort of growth of one particular issue.
Right. Yeah. You know, we got a 1-to-5 ratio, you know.
Right. That's amazing.
At the end of that article, once again, this is contrasting to the previous issue of Wizard. Expect the price of this book to probably increase in the aftermarket sales, but there's no way it can last. Remember the infamous Death of Robin? That fell on its face and he stayed dead. So again, compared to the Death of Robin, and Jason Todd is still dead at this point in time in continuity. You know, several years worth of, you know, 5 or 6 years or something like that. And then here's something I found from Hero Illustrated, so a different trade press. This was from November '93, you know, so about a year later, and actually getting close to, at this point in time, the actual return of Superman, because that was a year-long arc. Dear Hero, I have a few short, simple questions. Number one, will the value of Superman's memorial set, Superman 75 bag, lose value once he returns? That was the first question. And their response is, what do you think? The death issue doesn't do diddly if the dude ain't dead. Aside from the clever alliteration there,
right?
Again, the market people, the industry people are like, yeah, this is not gonna be sustainable.
Well, okay, while they do have a point, right? And they were proven correct, I do have to point out that their reference point, though, is a little different. In the face of Death of Robin and Batman 428, Robin came back, right? It wasn't Jason Todd, but the character was replaced via Tim Drake and continued on. So that very well could have been the reason why the Jason Todd death fell in value, because there came a new Robin who became instantly popular and people liked him more. So you create a situation like that, yes, the death issue of the previous one goes away. In this regard, I don't know, because while we had the upcoming 4 Supermen, and perhaps the idea was one of the 4 was going to replace Clark Kent as Superman, and could that have had an effect? It was very different when in the aftermath of it all, spoilers, guys, 30 years later, Clark Kent came back. That's a very different sort of scenario, because while it's no longer a death issue, it is still a seminal story arc piece. And I think that could have a different context, not necessarily market value structure, because again, all of the speculators market fell with the crash. But if that part didn't happen, would this have been a different scenario? Because there is a difference between creating a legacy character after a death versus the character coming back after their death. You know, there's a very different scenario between the two.
February. DC Comics is without a doubt the biggest news this month, thanks to the death of the Earth's mightiest hero. So again, they're continuing to be like, this is sustained across a couple of months, the conversation. And it still happens as
is that an accurate, wait, excuse me, is that an accurate quote? Do they call him Earth's mightiest hero?
I don't know. I feel like I should know this, but right now
I feel like he's Earth's greatest hero.
Yeah.
And mightiest is used in terms of singular heroes for Captain Marvel.
Oh.
He's the world's mightiest mortal.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm feeling like they're mixing metaphors here, because Earth's, if you say Earth's mightiest, that is the Avengers.
Well, of course, depending on, are we talking about universe, right? Oh, so I'm sorry. So you're saying they use that officially as a descriptor with Avengers?
Yeah. I want to say Earth's mightiest hero, Earth's mightiest heroes is the phrasing used to describe the Avengers. World's greatest hero is Superman, and then Earth's mightiest mortal is Captain Marvel, aka Shazam. So I'm just curious. I don't know. Maybe I'm being super nerdy, but I thought there was a specific phrasing and terminology, because actually, if you don't mind, would you check the Tombstone cover of that 75 issue that you just opened up? What does that say?
It says, "Here lies Earth's greatest hero."
Oh, see, I was gonna say they don't call Superman mightiest,
right?
Greatest. That was okay. So my actually is effective. Super nerd here. I'm sorry for everyone that's watching. It was like, really, Victor? Really? I'm just saying, it's monikers matter. Okay, monikers matter.
And there's going to be at least one or two people listening who are going to appreciate 100%.
Yes,
I'm listening. Yes,
I appreciate that. I so thoroughly appreciate that. That's amazing. That's amazing.
So the bottom here, they talk about this being the best-selling Superman book of all time, and probably is. The rough figures place it at this time in 2.5 to 3 million seller range.
Right, that's amazing.
A couple more call-out boxes here from that article. The price is so volatile that on a date of its release, some stores are fetching as high as $35 to $40 a copy.
Wow.
And which I once again, I think that was probably about what my parents paid when they bought it, or that was certainly what I remember in my mind seeing it on the shelves. So maybe they bought it when it was a little cheaper, because they bought it for me in November, or maybe shortly after, and then I got it for Christmas. So my memory's a little fuzzy here, a little reconstructed.
That's fair.
And I love it here again. Don't expect Superman 75 to maintain itself at any substantial price. So again, this seems to be the party line. We have here later on other snippets from this. When the 24-hour comic fans vanished from the stores, the prices of these hot books inexorably began their journey down the price chart, and that's to be expected. So here they're referencing not just 75, but also in this article they were talking about, Batman, etc. Here we go. I love this one. Here's where they get something specific. 75, somewhere down the line, will be selling for a whopping 9 clams. So $9. Now that's $9, 1993.
Right. That's probably today's market 18. I think that's kind of fair.
Any economists listening, I would be interested.
Chime in if you would. What's $9 1993 for today's market? I'm just curious.
Exactly. Here we go, May 93. So actually, this was shortly around the time of Adventures 500, the beginning of the reign. which we still haven't gotten to yet. I'm sure the audience is like, just shut up and get to the rain. Here we go. The actual book where Big Blue buys it has dropped to a stable $24, where at one point it was selling for $100. Okay, so let's actually get to some data, because I am a data nerd. Here we have about a year's worth of Wizard and their price guides. So they started listing 75 in the price guide in January 93. So let's dissect this data here. This is the direct edition, polybagged, near mint condition. Okay, I have Wizard here for a year, and I also have some Hero issues, which inconsistently had price values. So I marked in the ones that did have those catalogs. So what do you see in here, Victor?
Well, what's interesting is Hero, being the kind of new kid on the block, kind of comes in kind of wild style, right? Like they're just kind of all over the place with their pricing. But Wizard, being the stable voice, has more consistent pricing structure throughout. Like it's almost as though, dare I say, Hero came in trying to affect the price.
Interesting.
And Wizard is like, no, steady, gradual. Like this is for the long haul. But potentially, yeah, like if I were a person buying Death of Superman 75, I would want Wizard's pricing, right? Because they're kind of structured where, you know, $25 to $30 range is kind of expected. If I were selling, I would definitely want the high version of the Heroes market, because you're getting upwards of $45 at some point. Now obviously Hero, when it goes low, and I wonder what the quality context of that, because their graph is almost mirroring itself in terms of its value drop.
So,
well, no, just why is that?
Well, so my thought, and I looked in the it's been a while since I've looked at the details of these issues. So I'm not sure where they're, like, what stores they're pulling their data from, right? I mean, if we think about this as each store being like a case or a person, think of this as a research psychologist here. Let's assume they're pulling from the same general space. Wizard is giving us the average,
right?
Or, well, I guess they didn't say whether it's the average or the
but that's the great assumption
mode or whatever, but they're giving us some central tendency here. All right, this is what it's generally going for across our participants, the stores. What we have from the Wizard high and low is they're essentially giving us a little bit more of a min and a max, right? They're starting to get a little bit more what we might consider variability here, right? So what's the highest it's sold for and what's the lowest in the stores that we've sampled from? And then giving just a different set of data, because if you were a retailer, you know, would you want to use the average, or what would the high or low give you, right? Because I think what you just said a little bit ago, sort of thinking about it as a buyer, and of course, yes, I would want to buy at the average because it's going to be more stable. Absolutely. But if you were a seller, how would you approach this differently depending upon what magazine it gave you?
I think that's a huge piece. And kind of, again, going back to the Pawn Star model here, what we see in that show a lot, big shout out to them, because this is such a viable lesson in economics, and so many people, either through scripting for the show or just their general life, don't understand the way this works, is there has to be a value for resale. And that's the key part. In the high hero category, what we're looking at are potential collectors that aren't aiming to resell anything. If anything, I would possibly say that the Wizard amount might not even just be a matter of what, as a seller or as a buyer, I want to pay. It might be the max at what a buyer, as a shop, is willing to pay you, knowing that they could potentially fetch the black hero heights. Because I have to make some money off of it, right? Like if I am cashing you out from your investment, it has to be in a space or place at a value structure that I can then turn around and potentially sell it to another investor for profit. Otherwise it's not worth it to me to take it off your hands. So when we see on Pawn Stars, to come back to that reference, somebody say, hey, I've got this thing and I want this much money for it. And the pawn shop owner says, okay, yeah, I see the value, da da da. And maybe they bring in that expert, and expert says, well, it's actually worth 5 times that. Well, the amount that the expert says that it's worth is not what the pawn shop is going to pay you, because
Right.
the truth of the matter is they still would have to turn around and sell it to somebody else. So
Right.
what happens is you'll take the amount that you said you wanted, and you'll take the amount that the thing is now ultimately worth, and they'll offer you something in between, because they'll give you something that's a little bit more than what you asked for because the value is there and that's been established, but they got to have some room so that they make money as well, because they are still a seller. Like they are still a seller. So it's so funny. Like when you watch the show, there's so many people that don't understand that. So I can see on an economic basis that that's exactly how this could be used. As a buyer, I'm going to come in and I'm either going to want the hero low price, or at max, I'm going to try to cap out on the wizard price. And I think that's kind of the perfect meet in the middle space, where either that's the amount of money that I'm willing to spend to get it, or I should expect to sell it from a retailer. That is kind of what the wizard price says to me, which I think is really interesting.
Also, looking at just a year's worth of data here, right? Market Watch was correct in saying that it did stabilize.
Yep.
Certainly using the mean. But it certainly was not $9.
No, not quite.
By their average, $27 or $28, right? $30 high, and maybe $18 low. So now this is just a year. Now I have more wizards than this. This is the one that I had most consistently. That I have a few issues missing after this, but I wanted to give at least a year's worth of data for visualization purposes. Just some other dates that I cherry picked. We've got January 2021. I'm sorry, 21. January 2001.
There we go.
Just after Y2K, it was $16. Was the average according to Wizard, so less than it was in '94, but still reasonable. And then you had in September 2009, it was $15.
Minimal drop.
Yeah. And then just some other more recents. Here's some screenshots from Lone Star Comics, my comic shop. This is so $16 here. So it wasn't 18. I think this is where I bought it from, and I'm pretty sure I bought one of the two. That was the $16 here. Not sure about the $149.91 or 99 one. What made that one special? But generally speaking, pretty much fits what we see here from the data. This one is from Graham Cracker Comics. So they were selling for $25. So again, all still circling around about what we see here from '94. Now let's look at the platinum. We haven't talked much about that, right? We talked about the platinum version of the trade paperback, but this was an incentive, right? That they only printed a very small number. I can't remember exactly what, but they gave a handful of these copies to direct market to give away as incentives to buyers. Either they could raffle them off or they could charge extra, but this was a very small batch. So we see here platinum edition polybag near mint. June '93 was the first time that showed up in Wizard's price bag price. Thank you, price guide. Words. So this one, and this isn't the one they were referring to that sold for $300, right? In that previous Wizard issue, that was referring specifically to early versions of the direct market regular bag 75. So this is a bit more pricey.
Yes. this jumps. This jumps really high. But again, it's one of those things where if you look again at the hero low and high, they mirror, right? In a very sincere way, they mirror. What I do think that is very interesting is that the wizard pricing catches up to the hero low and then maintains it. So
Yes.
again, if you're looking at averages, as though wizard is the average, what they're coming through with is the best market showcase from any form of extreme, right? On the low end, yes, like I mean, that based on that one low end, I mean it's barely, it might be 10, 20 bucks, maybe 25 bucks on the lowest end. And Wizard recognizes like, yeah, that's you caught a deal. You're somebody's cousin. Like that's someone threw you a bone in the biggest, baddest way ever to do that. And especially if that is, I mean, yeah, that's some cousin Horatio stuff. Like you owed a bookie a debt and you gave them 25 bucks for this book that on the high end, the very next month is rated 500. Like that level of growth and margin, no, anything that grows like that is illegal. Like that's not even like that's not even weird. Like that's too weird. That's too weird within a month for it to do that. Of the same product. You know what I mean? Like that's too much. Not saying it's not possible, people. I'm being facetious, but that's still a huge jump to go on the lowest end, possibly like 25 bucks, and within the next month, it's worth $500. That's a lot.
And what's going on there? I mean, so between July 93 and August 93, recognizing that that's the cover date and when they wrote their articles was probably maybe about a month back. That's around the time where the rain is ramping up. So Superman's being reintroduced, and at that time, and as we'll talk about ad nauseum later, there's a lot of speculation as to what that would look like. So that was probably part of that major jump there too, because it was still in the midst of this storytelling of this major arc. All the other Superman issues were still selling pretty well at this point in time. It wasn't just a 75 thing. I don't have any data for that visualized, but I've been taking notes in all my Wizard.
It's
that
still
Superman consistently, all 4 titles throughout this entire year arc were on the upper 50, right? So it wasn't just being, Superman, it wasn't always number 1 on that Diamond 100. Some of that was speculator boom and one-time buyers, but there was some sustained readership for this year.
It's consistent. I think that's the other thing. Like, to put in context, how many other things do this, right? So we always talk about in comics how issue 1 spike in sales and issue 2s have a dramatic drop. In terms of regular everyday people, pop culture showcases, the same thing happens when a movie opens up. Your premiere weekend of a movie, it can catch, $100 million, but the second week of that movie's release, there is such a hardcore drop in terms of how many people go to see it. It becomes like the true rating of whether or not that movie is going to be successful. Premiere weekend almost doesn't count. Like there's a level to it that they're hoping like, well, we want to get this much because we know that if we don't hit this much, when it drops in the second week, that movie is either a success or a flop. That's how traditionally you can see such a thing happening in other markets when it comes to the value structure of how something is purchased, when it initially comes out, and where that value sits as it has lingered in its own marketplace. So pay attention to that stuff. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 just came out last weekend, and I think it made a collective $114 million. So I'm curious to see what it's going to make in week 2 to see what that percentage of drop actually is.
Now, some folks may ask, what was the big difference between the Platinum Edition and it really, from what I recall, it was just the bag. For this one, I think the I'll have to double check for sure. The bag was silver, a silver bloody symbol. There may have been a slight color change on the tombstone, But there was, as far as the inside of the book, as far as the bonuses that were in there, I'm pretty sure that everything I've read says there was no difference other than that silver bag, which does look cool. Is that $500 worth of cool? It's not even $200 worth of cool to me, and that's saying a lot given my sort of like OCD level collector mentality. I'm like, I want that.
I gotta have it. I gotta have it.
Not $200 worth of cool.
Yeah.
January 2001, Wizard had it listed at 50. Okay. So a considerable drop from where it was in December 94. December 2007 and July 2008, it had it jumping back above the 100 mark again.
Okay. Now, December 2007, we would have gotten our first of the animated DC movies, Superman Doomsday, which I believe came out in 2006. So that could attribute to the resurgence, if you will, of that story's popularity. That's definitely a possible uptick piece for that.
Yeah. Why it's sustained and even increased a little bit between that year, I don't know. What do you think?
I'm trying to think of what all, because I think we had a couple different showcases of things with Superman and Doomsday. So like I think we had Superman Doomsday the movie. I think we actually caught a couple more episodes of Justice League Unlimited that might have featured Doomsday. So that kind of became kind of cool references therein with that. I believe we might be around the time of Superman Batman, the series, which also specifically the one that featured Supergirl, featured Doomsday possibly coming back. We weren't sure if this was actually Doomsday, clones of Doomsday. It was a bunch of Doomsdays. So that also could fit into any rise and fall of such a thing happening. So there's a lot of little ticks that could have made it something more interesting that people started asking about because of pop culture reference. And somebody goes, well, do we have this? Do we have that? You know.
Yeah, because we see there at the bottom about a little over a year later, it drops by about 50% again. Right. So so I'm interested in this because, you know, I've occasionally seen it on my comic book store walls and things like that. And I don't want to spend the $200, but it's like, okay, I got what is the cycle that it's gonna hit the trough again? And that's when I buy.
There you go.
Because here's the cover. And you can see this is from Graham Cracker Comics website. They've got it listed at $250. So again,
now
pretty similar.
Wait. I would definitely tell them 1987 is the wrong year to showcase with this. So they're gonna want to adjust that for validity's sake.
Right. So yeah, so that's 75, the platinum edition. And then we got the newsstand for completion here, you know, and this is first printing, because in the Wizard Market books they usually did list the separate printings. And so what I've got here is one, because that was always consistently higher than the rest. The rest were usually not too much different than the cover price. You know, we see here that first year, January 93 to 93, or it's the first half year. It's gets to, you know, $8 ish, and then it jumps to 25 about the time where the reign begins. Yeah, you know, or in the early parts of that, because then it was about November again, 93. I have to double check my date specifically, but that was when they officially ended the reign and Superman was back, right, as we knew him, but with a mullet. Yes, the classic mullet.
You know, and I love that we are seeing, and here's a term that we haven't used, and I think it's important to use, is key issue. Key issue is a term that we use now that says this is a seminal single issue of a run for a particular reason, whether it's a creator's first issue, a character's first appearance, a character's death, or something like that. It becomes a key issue because it becomes referential throughout the series. At some point, you kind of can go back to that as the first time this ever happened, first time somebody ever contributed, what have you. And I think that's the thing that makes this book so important is, yes, Superman came back, but this functions as a key issue. And we see this because where the immediate, seller's response or buyer's response to it, actually, from February or maybe March to June, right? You have more people coming in. Oh, I want that issue 75. I want issue 75. So from the $1.25 that it started at, it jumps up to about $8, right? So that's kind of the sweet spot to say, do you really want this? Are you really trying to collect this? Yes, no, yes, no. And then all of a sudden, as we understood stories to be, because you're talking 4 months from, let's see, March, April, May, June, that's 4 months, which would actually be about 16 books worth of content from the Superman publishing franchise. If they hadn't brought him back in 16 books, the thought was maybe they're not actually bringing him back. Like, he might actually just be dead. And right. That's not what we understood the marketing formula to be, or assumed it would be. For whatever reason, we assumed he was just going to turn back around and he was going to come right back because it's Superman. And so after they're producing 16 books where he doesn't come back, and they're like, oh, by the way, there's something more that we're going to flip it even more than we did before. We're going to say that there's 4 guys that are claiming to be Superman, and now we don't know which one is right. Boom, now it skyrockets even further because this is clearly a key issue that is now setting the stage for these 4 newcomers and what that means for the Superman mythos going forward. We don't even know. That's what this is setting up. So you can see how the market is responding to the publishing of this book, how they had created this traction with the Death of Superman series, and smartly they go, and now we're going to add on to it, and then we're going to add this to it, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. It's that Vince McMahon meme where you think it's so good, and then it gets better, and then it gets even better, and you just like, that's what this showcases, is how as they're doing this is the way this is coming about. And I would say that sweet spot where it jumps again might be when they start doing the renumbering for Superman with the shield numbering, so that all of the books carry the idea that there's one continuity that's supposed to happen between all of the books, no matter what.
Yes, yeah.
That's one more time where this key issue changed the way things moving forward.
Yeah, and it's sort of, it more or less plateaus there by August 93. Well, $25 doesn't go above 30, but yeah, there is that sort of spike again there at the April 94.
Yeah.
And then it sustains up there under $30, but 20, 27, $28. It would be interesting to go back and pull out all of the old issues. I will probably do that at some point and like look at them and like make this intricate graph here to be like, what's happening each month? When did they introduce Man of Tomorrow?
When is
Conduit?
I love it.
January 2001 dropped to $5 again, so still above cover price.
Yeah.
And
still
then
4 times cover price. Like, that's the thing. So many people will look at them like, oh, it lost so much value. It's still 4 times what it was worth when it came out. Like, that's a lot.
And that can't all be just inflation.
Exactly.
I'm no economist, but and then in 2009 there it's $7, so that may be inflation. Yeah,
I'll definitely give that $2 bump inflation. Like, that nothing else really happened to make that issue bump up in value. But again, key issue, it hit a seminal point because when it does its drop, it doesn't go back to cover price or below. It is still above what people paid for it initially, and that says a lot.
So what is it today, you may ask? Well, glad you asked. Here is a screenshot again from Lone Star Comics or mycomicshop.com. They've got it, the highest ones aside from those, the maybe really crazy CG seed ones, but about $12. And then that is, and this is one thing I pulled here. this kind of threw me a bit because they had two that had the, were listed as first printing newsstand. But what struck me as a little odd, given that there were two, is one was listed as direct market. And I originally thought the direct market was always the Polybag.
No,
But if you look at those covers there too, one has the barcode
right.
and the other doesn't. So what do you make of that?
So at this point in time, they're beginning to phase out of supplying to newsstand markets. Newsstand markets were a problem because they ultimately were the riskiest for publishers to sell to, because newsstands had the right to do strip cover return and still get their money back, right? So they would get a credit from the publisher. And if I'm not mistaken, books with the barcode, those were for direct market. And books without the barcode on the cover, those were newsstand. Correct me if I'm incorrect, if I got those backwards, but that's kind of the breakdown of how one is for one and one is for the other.
Okay.
So with the direct market, those were specific static sales. The direct market at the time could not return books. So if the direct market, aka local comic specialty retail shops, bought the book, it was sold. Like that, it didn't go back to the distributor, it didn't go back to the publisher. That just was sold, and that's it. So it was something where, in a way, the value could fluctuate between the two, because if it was a newsstand book, there was the risk that it could get destroyed, and so it could potentially have a higher value because there was more of an opportunity for it to get strip cover returned and be destroyed because it didn't move, as opposed to a direct market where that's when you got back issues and long boxes full of the same issues over and over and over again. That's what the direct market was built on, was to sell those. But newsstands don't have that. They get rid of non-selling books after a certain amount of time and get a credit to find something else to try to sell to customers. So that would be the idea for me.
So the bagged edition, then, that was just exclusive to direct market.
That was an exclusive.
Right?
That was an exclusive specialty item that wasn't just the newsstand edition. Yeah.
And they probably assume that most people who are going to direct market stores would want the bagged. But I suppose there's maybe someone who's like, well, no, I just want the $1.95. I don't have the $2.50.
That's kind of the idea is when in, how do I say this? They printed a certain amount and they bagged a certain amount of that print run, right? So you can make an exclusive item. And this is something I tell fellow independent comic creators. You can up the value of something just by how you package it. Mm-hmm. So you can print the exact same book, right? Because when we do our printing, the more copies of a book that we print, the cheaper it is per unit of what we've printed. And what's really smart is when you can print that big batch, but then take certain bundles within it and add something to it. Because then you've only, you've invested this long form amount. Let's say you bought 1,000 books, and if you go to the right printer, 1,000 books cost you $1,000, so you get them for $1 a book. Say your average cover price in today's market is $3. So if you're selling, your traditional stock, $3 a piece, you only have to sell approximately 325 of them to make your $1,000 back, right? So say you set it up so that you can do just that. You take that 325 and mark those at $3 so that you'll have enough stock to make back that run. The remaining, what is that, $575, you can split and do different things to those. So say you take another 100 out of the remaining 575 and you go and do a sketch cover, right? So you take a totally separate piece of paper that's blank, maybe a heavy cardstock, print your, title on it, print that, get them cut, and have them restapled to the books that you already had printed. Now you sell those at a premium of $5 to $10. So now you're making huge profits because you've already accounted for, the $1,000 make back that you needed to off of the original 325. So you got that. So now you have another 100 that you're selling for $5 to $10, which gives you the opportunity to make another $500 to $1,000 off of just this specialty batch that all came out of the original batch. Like it's all about, you know, profitability, thinking marketing wise. And this is one of the plights of independent comic creators that are fans, but not necessarily marketers. They don't know that this is the way that you can do this to sustain your business and keep the practice growing. They kind of do a 1-for-1, and it doesn't always work out that way. It's very difficult to maintain that way if you're not thinking in those caliber numbers. So, you know, and then again, if you do that, you still have 475 units that you haven't even touched, that you could do other various things to, whether that's an additional, you know, sketch cover run, a different sketch cover, maybe you do a black, you know, cardstock version, and you only do 50 of those, but you charge 25 for that. Like there's all kinds of things that you can do that add to the marketability of these pieces. You know, that's not even accounting for taking some of the regular covers and signing some of them and charging more for that, or signing some and slabbing them and charging more for that. Like there's all these different things that you can do that basically will make your single purchase or investment of $1,000 in a book and make back that money 2, 3, you know, tenfold if you do it correctly. That's the hard part, but that is the opportunity that you can create if you think about things in that way. So I think that's definitely what they did, was they took issue 75, and there are direct market versions, and then some of those numbers they took and bagged and said, charge twice as much for this, and let's see what happens. And people bought it. And so then they're like, see, we told you. Like, that's, you know, charge twice as much because we're putting it in a bag and we're putting this other stuff in the bag with it. Minimal investment. You're talking maybe at scale, it cost them another quarter, maybe 50 cents to make the polybag versions, and it netted a whole nother, you know, number of sales from retailers, and then sales for retailers to get those. So very smart. Very,
and
it
also had the new cover too.
Right. Exactly. So, you know.
So listeners at home, your free marketing lesson has been brought to you by Vantage In-House University.
Hey, that's right, VIU.
There we go. That's new branding right there. So we finally reached the end of our discussion of the death of Superman, and you know, one of the things that we just could spend a lot of time talking about, speculation about the price, etc. And, you know, of course, the people who were more skeptical saw this as a marketing stunt, and that, you know, you'd get some people at the beginning. Okay, there you go. You made your money. Now moving on.
Right.
But the creators have said since the beginning that it was more than just about the death. The death was just the beginning. The end was only the beginning. It wasn't just a flash in the pan, that they wanted to focus really the story on what happened after. What is it like without Superman there around? Not just for the people in the story itself, for Metropolis and the DC universe, but what was it for fans? So what really did happen? You know, that will be our next deep dive into Funeral for a Friend, A World Without Superman.
Yes.
Hope to see you there.
Yeah,